Motherfucking cat keyboard. I got this. I think I found this on top of a trash can in San Francisco, like the better part of 10 years ago. And it's been floating around my basement. It's a classic thing to circuit bend. I've wanted to do something cool with it. I recently busted it out because I've got a little nephew and we were just going to give it to him for real. And it's broken. It's completely dead. Shocking. So instead, I want to see if I can repurpose it as a MIDI controller using the ESP32 S3 boards that I've been having a lot of fun with lately. Here's an example of one of the things I built with the S3 board. It's got like, I think up to 20 or so analog reads, 18 minimum. So it's got enough for 16 sliders and a little screen up here monitoring. So, as I'm turning these dials, stuff is being monitored. I'm working this into the live set lately, 3D printed, hand wired. So maybe we'll talk about this one day, but all that to say, the S3 board is uniquely nice among the ESP32s. It comes with the stuff you need to send like USB MIDI out of the box. It's a snazzy board. I've recently started buying them in bulk, so I got a bunch. And I want to see if I can intercept this cat keyboard, actual keyboard part. So step 0, pop the back off. I've already got these screws off. There we go. There's really only two things connecting the back to the front, which is the microphone, which I don't care about, and the batteries, which I don't care about. So we are going to snip all of that. Truly don't care. We're going to leave ourselves enough lead that if we do want to reconnect that later, we can, but we don't have to. That was just enough time to lose my screwdriver. So with this open, let's kind of talk through what we've got here. The miscellaneous button areas on the front have their own little boards here. We've got a speaker. We've got kind of like a logic board where everything lives. We've got a power switch. And then we've got this, which is the part that I actually care about. It looks like all of the keyboard stuff here comes into an area where it comes out via this ribbon cable. It gets interpreted here, whatever. These are usually outputting some kind of matrix, so there will be some combination of on-off across all of these things that correspond to these many different notes, which is how you get more signal than you have wires. You're getting like whatever it is. You're getting 16 notes or something like that out of what looks like an 8 ribbon cable. So we're going to start by getting access to this. We're going to pull this out. We're going to snip this cable. We're going to solder some pins on the end so we can put it on a breadboard, and then we're going to just kind of work with this part in isolation. Okay, let's think about this. What do I need here? I've got 2 ribbons here. Why do I have 2 ribbons? All right, well, here's the deal. I think there's no world where these don't get cut. So I'm just going to snip them, and then we can start dealing with it later. This should lift out. We're going to take these 2 buttons with us. I'm not going to cut those guys. And now we've got this toothy grin with this little silicone pads that are what's triggered by these keys. So we're done with all this. We can set this aside. Going forward, we're going to be working with just this. Here's how I hope this works. I think one of the ribbons is from this area, this like larger group of buttons. And so that is data coming into this board. And then one of these ribbons is the keyboard out, and one of these ribbons is the sum of all of those buttons out. That's my guess. That's my hope. Is that what's actually happening? I don't know. What I want to do is start listening to this thing and hope that that's the only thing we need. I just dropped a bunch of these everywhere, so that's very cool. Begin by splitting these. Ooh. This one split into just the bare wire. That's not ideal. Anyway, how many of these are there? 6, 7, 8. That's irritating. Whatever. We need some of this. 7, 8. Get 8 pins of that. Gonna get some tape. I don't think you can see this on the video, but this is bare copper that pulled out of the plastic casing instead of getting the plastic to separate. So I need this to be a little bit more protected so that it's not touching the surrounding pins. Not great. I'll take it. I'm going to use a breadboard to hold this for me. So those guys are nice and tinned. Same thing for these guys. This is a fairly spicy surgery. Really fragile wires. I got our tips tinned here. not beautiful, but it is correct. So it turned out I needed 2 of these ribbon cables, but we've got them connected sequentially. I had Cursor write a little program that converts the matrix into MIDI signals, and that was it. We'll post the code, so I'm not going to talk through it, in no small part because Cursor wrote it and I don't even care about understanding it, frankly. My basic process for this was having Cursor write me something that outputs the 8x6 matrix that the ribbon cables correspond to, and then I just press buttons to make sure that they go the right places. After that, it was a matter of looking at the cat keyboard and looking at what notes. I picked A2 to C5, I think, is what it looks like is on that board. And then it was just like, hey, Cursor, write me a thing that sends these MIDI notes. And it did. One of the things that the debug program ended up showing me was that the keys are kind of sticky. I cleaned them with alcohol. I touched up the silicone where I could. Still problematic. They really want it to stick. So the compromise that I made was every MIDI note sends itself for 100 milliseconds fixed and then imagines that it's turned off. This means I can't play long chords. It also means I won't have stuck notes. So that's a compromise I'm willing to make. This is kind of like a toy keyboard. It's a silly thing. That's fine. So from here, I'm really torn because it's like I want this to do more, but I'm also stoked on it and kind of just wanted to put it back together. So I got to do some thinking about that. But man, very happy with how that's gone so far. It's only been like an hour. So here's what I've decided to do. I want this to be a little bit more than just the keys working. So went in the parts store, found a handful of crap. What I want to do is have alternating pots and buttons here. Got these little surface mount knobs. They almost fit. I'll do just a little bit of, hopefully I'll be able to file it away rather than having to cut into it seriously. But whatever, gonna do that. So we'll have little vintage knobs like that. Doing this, I kind of like that they look like little paws still. Thought about putting a proximity sensor in here, one of those hand wave things. Pain in my ass, we're leaving this empty. These I'm not going to have to do anything. These I'm going to do the same thing as over here. And then we have to do the glowing red LED eyes. Just stick some of those guys right in there. It's a classic for this guy. And then last thing is I have this switch that I want to put about there that's going to change between sending a pulse note and sending a note for as long as it's actually held. So what I'm going to do is have a mode where it sends just something like 100 millisecond pulse, so it turns itself off even if the key sticks until it's hit again. And in the other note, I want to be able to actually hold them because I do, with all these knobs, I want to be able to play expressive, long held notes, knob twisty boys, but I also want to be able to just not deal with sticky keys. So that's my sort of hacky solution for that. So now that these are filed away and I'm absolutely covered in microplastics, these things fit very snugly but perfectly in here. So I'll be able to do that. I'll have to get epoxied, but not a big deal. I also got this one at the same time, so that's nice. So now that I have all the holes drilled, I just need to wire this stuff up. So I'm going to use this silicone wire. I can solder to these pins and then run this to the board, and I'll be able to connect and disconnect rather than having to run each one of these wires directly to the ESP board. Here's what all these guys look like after a bunch of extremely tedious soldering. Now I'm going to have to install these before I can wire them up for the final assembly, which is why they all have tape on the tips of them, because I've got to epoxy the keyboard and then sort of push them through. So everything is in here. These were all filed tight enough to friction fit pretty evenly, with the exception of this one. He's just going to be a little wonky, but otherwise pretty happy with how it's looking. Making some progress here. Finally hooked a screen up. So in addition to the keys working, I've now got the ability to turn these pots, and those values are moving. And if I'm pressing the buttons, we're monitoring that stuff as well. So that's the first half of this guy. I got to get this other half still. I'm stoked on how this came out. I ended up just having to chop the battery out to fit everything. I left the breadboard in there and everything. Like I could have tried soldering to the board directly, but it didn't seem worth it. The screen is actually still in there. You can kind of see. Fuck it. That's fine. I just left it completely intact so I could pop the back off it and mess with it if I needed to. But so far, he's been as reliable as a toy like this can be. So, you know, the keys still stick. You can see if I hold, it does that. But if I switch modes down here, then it just sends those pulses, which sort of negates some of the key stickiness. But knob's working, buttons working, everything's good. This guy's not quite where I'd feel confident using him for something serious in a live set, but like as a joke, you know, he works great. And you see a lot of these that are like circuit bent traditionally, so it's nice to have one that actually sends MIDI. That feels like a relatively more rare thing. And speaking of that, I got to give a shout out to the guy from Adafruit who built this really cool version of this. It was like all black. It was much more advanced, but he's one of the ones who sort of outlined how this matrix code worked, which is what saved me a lot of time in making this possible. So I'll put a link to the description. You can check that out as well. But this guy works. I'm stoked. So that's it. That's the video.